Go ahead and let's start webinar. Sure.
Oh, yep. Practice section. We don't need that.
Good morning, everybody. This is the February 13th, 2025 special meeting of the Nantucket Conservation Commission. We are meeting in a hybrid fashion with some attendees via Zoom and some physically present at the meeting trailer. The first thing we need to do is to establish a quorum of members. So members, when you hear your name, please respond in the affirmative. Tim Brain.
I'm here.
Joe Plandowski. Joe, can you hear us? Okay, Mike Miserelli.
Here.
Joe Plandowski, can you please respond in the affirmative that you hear us? We do need to wait until we have verbal confirmation from Joe in order to make a quorum requirement. I heard from Commissioner Williams that she planned to join via Zoom. I don't see her yet, but until we have verbal confirmation from Commissioner Plandowski that he is present, we don't have a quorum to start this meeting. Joe, can you hear us? Okay. Jeff or Will, could you try to assist with Joe, please?
No.
I do. Do you mean to ring him? I just texted him, but I don't know if that'll help. Do you want his number?
Linda's in.
Linda's in. I'm just gonna call Joe and put him on speaker for you guys to talk to him, okay?
Okay, thank you. While you're doing that, Commissioner Williams, we're establishing a quorum.
Vince, I can't hear.
Are you present and can you hear?
We can hear you.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. And Joe, it seems like he's there. So we have 5 members present. What we need to do now is we need to take a motion to approve the agenda. Is there
So
a motion?
move, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mike. By roll call vote, Tim Brain,
Hi.
Joe Plandowski.
I'm not sure he
He
can
probably
hear you.
doesn't
He
have
said
his-
something earlier. Yeah.
Mike Miserelli,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg, aye. That does carry with the quorum of 4, and we'll try to figure out Joe's technical issues. So we'll be starting today under public hearing, Sconsie Beach Preservation Fund at 41 through 119 Baxter Road, SC 48, 37, 36. And the hearing today will be specifically to talk about that project only. Before we get started, does staff, Jeff, Will, anybody else have any updates for us about anything related to this project before we proceed?
You may have to call Joe, Will, to
I'm
get him
gonna.
to walk him through it.
He may just have his audio speaker set to the wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he probably just has his volume on his computer device off, but so Jeff, do you have an update for us?
Yeah, he says he can't hear you. You'll have to call him. Somebody will have to call him.
I just texted you his number.
Yeah, we're
working
pull
on it.
his number. We'll wait a second.
Okay. Thank you all who are on this call for waiting patiently. Hybrid meetings can be
Hello?
a pain and a pleasure at the same time. So
I
we
can't
appreciate
hear.
you holding by for a
I
few
have no
moments.
sound.
We can hear you.
Yeah.
He doesn't have his microphone on.
Well, his microphone is on. I think it's just that it's either the volume on his computer is way down or.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, your microphone's on. Do you have your volume on your computer turned up, or is it on the mute accidentally?
He's
He
talking
can't
to
hear
me.
us. He's talking to Will on the phone or
Yeah.
somebody on the phone.
It says speakers, headphones, same as system, test speaker and microphone, switch to phone audio, leave computer audio. It selected speakers / headphones.
Don't you just love technology?
Just did. Didn't do
Any
a
luck?
thing. Jesus Christ. I can't believe this.
I mean, can you just stay on the phone so that he can hear through what's happening in the room, I guess?
We're gonna have him log out and re-log in and see if that.
I'm doing it right now.
Okay, thank you. So in the meantime, I know SPPS representatives in the past have indicated they want all commissioners present, so unfortunately, I think we're just waiting until we figure out Mr. Plandowski's audio situation. So Chip and Dwight and Meredith and Gordon and whoever else is there, we appreciate your patience here today.
Yeah, no, through you, we agree with the way that you're conducting this. So we don't want to have any testimony that he can't hear. So I think that that defeats the purpose. So even though I don't think he's had a Mullen rule issue yet, we'd prefer to have him able to hear as well as speak.
Thank
So
you. So
we agree.
we'll just stand by for now.
For what it's worth, we agree.
Is he going back out and coming back in again?
He's going to try to do that. Yes.
Yes. Will is still on the phone with him, sorting it out.
Or can Will just explain how he can just call in to the audio on his phone if the computer's not working?
That's the best I can do. I'm not in. I am not in.
You can't hear us at all? See you. You might have him just call in then.
Yeah, use the phone connection if you can walk him through that.
Okay. All right, Joe. You want to try?
Tim, I think Tim Brain, I thought, had a problem. I don't know if he's on. He's not on either.
Yes, he is.
Everybody's here. We're just trying to get your audio working.
Speakers.
I can hear, well, I'm hearing Seth talking, but it's coming through your phone.
Through my phone. Okay. Go to audio and click switch to phone audio.
Yes. There is. That's wonderful.
I mean, I guess can you ask him to just drive to the trailer or to call in
So I
on?
gotta call the number that's on that screen. I'm copying it down so I don't get it screwed up. All right, I'll hang up and I'll call that number. Thanks. Bye.
All right, Joe's gonna try the call-in option. I feel you may have surmised that I was outside, but you probably hear a lot of that.
Have we started the recording?
Yes, this has all been recorded, so it'll be available for the public to view later.
Sure that we did it the right way.
And like local access entertainment. Playing world, playing fun. I don't tell you. Thanks so things.
Hello,
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
hello? Yes, I can.
All right.
All right.
You could probably set that on speakerphone and put it on the table and it might be helpful.
I think you're right. My arm will fall off otherwise.
Good work. All right, Seth, I think
Okay.
we're
Thank you all kindly for your patience. So we've opened the hearing for the SPPF application. At this time, Jeff, do you have an update for us about changes to the order or anything else that is relevant?
Yep. Real quickly, Joe, you may need to mute on your computer and not your phone. While I'm bringing it up, I just wanted to make everyone aware that on the pack for today, I put up the revised draft order. Again, I only showed the revisions on the local order, to try to save a little bit of confusion. And I provided a little change summary for people to take a look at. So if people have questions on those, I'm happy to walk through them, but I just want to make sure that everyone at least received and saw that.
Thank you, commissioners. Did you all get a chance to review that updates? Okay. Is there any other?
No, I did not. When did that go out?
We posted it at the end of last week.
Oh, you posted it.
It was
All
also emailed.
Oh, so that was the thing. No, I didn't get that one. I got the town
Well, why don't-
report thing.
There are only like 3 changes, so I'll just walk through them real quick for everybody, just
Thank you.
Okay.
for discussion. So what we have is on number 40 related to the pickup and retrieval of everything. So we added a sentence in there that says, to aid in identification and retrieval, the applicant shall be required to permanently tag or mark all man-made materials used in the project, including geotubes, core logs, posts, anchors, etc. That was suggested at the last meeting. 51, I know this came up last time. This is related to a physical location for sand storage on island. I think from that discussion we had, we're recommending now to keep that condition that says shall provide an on-island location to store sand at a volume that would provide 10% of the total volume based on initial phase construction volumes to cover the structure to a full sand template. And then a sentence after that that says, should a physical location not be available or feasible, the applicant needs to provide a contract with an on-island sand source for that amount of sand. And then in the change summary, just again, did some kind of back of the napkin math on that by reach, showing that if they did all 5 reaches at the same time, that would be a contract or a storage location for 10,000 cubic yards of sand. For just reach 1 and reach 2, it would be closer to 4,500 cubic yards of sand. For that, just as an example. And then we redid 70F, which related to the previously walkable beach. So we've changed that to unobstructed beach access, but we've changed that to read now, failure to maintain an unobstructed beach access along shore in front of any of the, that's some bad grammar, any of the coastal engineering structures. This access shall be measured as 15 linear feet between the mean high water and the most seaward edge of any coastal engineering structure. So that was a change down from 20 to 15. I know there was some back and forth whether it was 20 or 10 or what was going to happen. And then kind of how we're monitoring that. Should this beach width measure less than this number for a quarterly shoreline survey, the commission shall be informed. And then the commission shall have the ability to require additional monitoring until the following quarterly survey. Should two consecutive quarterly surveys or should any additional monitoring show consistent obstructed access, the project will be deemed in failure. So it was to comments from the meeting related to the cycle of action from the commission being too long, the width being too wide, and trying to find a way to deal with that. So essentially, it's to notify the commission, and then to have a kind of a discussion about whether or not there needs to be additional monitoring related to the unobstructed access. Other than that, the order is the same as it was at the last hearing.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'll just remind all commissioners that, what staff writes are suggestions. If we disagree with any of the conditions, then we could obviously change them. So I'll let people ask questions or make comments on those three specific things. I see Commissioner Williams' hand first, and then Joe Landowski, I see you after. So Linda, go ahead.
That last one, I don't think that's what we talked about. Because at times during the winter, you're not going to have a walkable beach. That water's going to be right up against it, especially with the storm after storm after storm. I thought there was a situation where we said for more than 30 days or for what consecutive days or whatever. Because maintaining 15 feet in a storm like apparently we're going to get with the wind this weekend, you're not going to have 15 feet. You're going to be lucky to have 5 feet at that point. That's the whole point of these geotubes. I thought there was some discussion about length of time or consecutive or, something along those lines. This says that we got to maintain it at 15 feet no matter what the hell's happening out there. That wasn't my intention with that section. The other ones I'm fine, but I'm concerned about the way this is worded now. I'm not opposed to going to 15 feet versus 10 versus 20. I think it splits the difference. I'm just concerned about the way it's written because the minute it's like not 15 feet, some idiot's going to go out there with a drone and said, "Oh my God, they're in violation for what? 24 hours?" So I'm not playing that game here. So I'm concerned about that, unless I'm missing something.
Thank you, Linda. I don't actually think that's what the condition reads. I think it says that, if one quarterly survey shows a distance less than that, then the commission has the option to order additional monitoring to continue to identify whether that's a sustained effect or just a periodic thing. I do think I agree with you.
Well, yeah.
I do think I agree with you in some extent that what that additional monitoring is unnecessarily vague.
Yeah.
I think it should be tied to a specific time period. And in general, I don't really remember there being a lot of dissent to the 20-foot. It seemed like at last hearing, all the commissioners were pretty much in favor of the 20-foot distance. So I saw that change made, but it doesn't necessarily, in my recollection, match the testimony at the hearing.
As I say, I don't mind the 15, but I do think that, if it's a quarter, obviously that's 3 months. But how many of those days in the 3 months? What's the average? That concerns me because anybody can come in and say it's not there for 24 hours. You got to do something. I don't want to get into that constant contest with people.
Yep, thank you.
About that.
I'm going to go to Joe Plandowski now, and then Mr. Nile, I see your hand raised. Joe, we can't hear you on mute. You're on mute on the phone, I believe.
This unmute. Does that work?
That works.
Yeah.
Okay, number 38 wasn't mentioned. And in number 38, it says in compliance with conditions number 30. I believe 30 is wrong. I think it's 36 is the correct condition.
Yes, there is a whole bunch of asynchronous things and typos wrong numbering and grammatical issues that will have to be changed in the final draft. And I think we point them out when we can, but I think the intention was that myself and the staff would look through once we figured out the meat of the order to make sure that it was, actually sufficient from a technical standpoint. But yeah, that's not the only one in there. There's other inconsistencies.
Well,
And
the number,
the second one I have is number 70A, which talks about sand mitigation as required herein. I read this thing a couple of times. I don't see anything about mitigation in this document. And I wonder if the word herein ought to simply be dropped.
Well, there are several conditions that specifically call out the sand mitigation, so I think that's fine. But okay, Mr. Nyland.
I know that we're going to be hitting the various items. I just wanted to get back to the walkable beach. If you
Yes.
recall, that's protected under the bylaw for recreation purposes. So what we had included was, and obviously we would like 10 feet rather than 15, but it should be tied to the summer. So it should be tied to quarters 2 and 3 rather than any quarter. Because that's the time when that's most often used, and that's when the recreation interest should be protected. So having it open at any quarter, I think, as Commissioner Williams has said, that it could be in failure at any time.
Thank you. I categorically disagree to your argument in that we don't protect recreation in any specific time period. We protect recreation year round, whether it be more or less used in one quarter versus the other is, I would say, regulatorily irrelevant. It's our duty to make sure that 365 days a year, that interest remains protected and possible to the public. So thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with you, but this is a condition of failure. And if we're talking about failure, we really should tie it to the time when it's most often used. I agree that recreation is 12 months of the year, but this is a condition of failure, which is a higher standard. And it would be expected that you would have certain conditions during the winter time that might make it a little bit harder to walk through, but people will do that. Those people that are recreating at that time will make sure that it's done. I think what you want to really be doing is to protecting at the time of the year when the recreation takes is most often, and that's why when you tie it to failure, that's when we have a problem. We think that you should change that to have the quarterly in during the times when it's being used.
Thank you, Chip. I take your point. I don't agree with it, but I hear it. So, commissioners, at this point, do you have any specific comments or questions on any of those three changes that Jeff specifically mentioned? Yes, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would like to find a way to write the, I guess, failure criteria that includes the summer months or a time frame, because I fully expect in the winter that you could make an argument for failure. So I agree with Mr. Nyland's comments and on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And I think some of what you're saying is probably related to Linda's comments as well about finding an actual time period that makes sense. I do think we really should shy away from calling out summer versus winter or calling out different recreational periods, because that seems arbitrary to me, but I'll leave it at that. Other commissioners? Yes, Linda, go ahead.
I mean, I understand our rules, regs, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're walking down on that beach on a date like today, with the tide and the wind, just to be arbitrary and walk on that beach, you are taking your life in your hands. It is unsafe because the angle of the beach is very sharp at this time of year. It's in and out. The tides come in and out very heavily when you're getting pushed by a northeast wind. I've never in my life seen anybody except a few, who walk that beach in December, January, February. So I'm having an issue. I sort of agree with Mike, and I sort of agree with Chip that we have to be pragmatic and reasonable about this. And when people do, very few do walk that beach because you can't even get onto the beach except for like a mile away, both directions. If you're going to do that, it's going to be in the times when the tides don't come up that close and you're safe. You're being personally safe. So I'm having a problem with this whole walking the beach in a day like today or tomorrow or Saturday in particular. That's just me.
Yeah, I understand that, and there's a way that we can probably accomplish this by thinking about the timeline of monitoring, but it is 100% not our role to make value judgments on what people's choice of recreation is. Our job is to provide unobstructed access alongshore for
We have to then we
any
have to craft it like you said,
for
some
anybody
way
in
to
any
craft
time,
it.
Linda, it's not your turn. For anybody in any time that wishes to do so, whether we think it's unsafe or not, that's our job. We can certainly figure out a monitoring period that would have a long enough timeline to allow for variability in the beach profile. But I will strongly object to any reference to calling out specific months or user groups or seasons because that is not within our purview here. So thank you. Tim Brain, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I basically agree. If there's a way to work this out, I basically agree with Mike and Linda regarding the use of the beach in the winter months. It's barely used in the summer months, but also, and I'm fine with the 15 feet, by the way. So
Thank
that's
you.
it.
Jeff, I'll recognize you at this point.
Yeah, I think when we also look at this access, I appreciate that we're tying it to the recreational interest. I think when we were recommending this condition, one of the other things that we always take into account as well is access isn't always just for recreation, right? You need access to properly monitor and maintain the structure. You need access for our staff to go down and inspect the structure and trying to ensure that. And I appreciate wanting to define it as best possible, but there are definitely times of the year where whether it's recreational or working access is going to be needed on a 12-month cycle, whether we want it to be or not. And it needs to be unobstructed to be able to go down and do that.
Thank you, Jeff. Commissioners, any further questions or comments about this condition or any other conditions? Okay, do we want to have a discussion? I mean, I believe some people said their anecdotal opinions about this point, but the change from the 20-foot to the 15-foot linear distance, will commissioners indicate their thoughts on that? Yes, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would be okay with 15. I think 10 foot is a little too slim for reasons that Jeff just specified for monitoring and for access if machines have to be down there. So, but I think 15 would be acceptable in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
I'd support 15 feet also.
Okay, I know Linda said she did as well, and so it sounds like everybody is pretty much in favor of that. Vince Murphy, are you would you consent to that linear distance?
I was trying to interrupt and thank you for calling on me. You beat me to my own attempt. Yes, 15 feet is acceptable. It splits the difference and it should serve all interests.
Thank you. So commissioners, we'll have other chances to chime in about other conditions, but if you have no further thoughts on these three changes, I'm going to open up to the public at this time. Okay, We'll recognize members of the public to talk specifically on these changes only. I see Mr. Ruthven. Please introduce yourself for the record and indicate what you want to speak on, and then go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trey Ruthven with Sustainable Coastal Solutions here on behalf of Nantucket Land and Water Council. I wanted to offer a little bit of an explanation relative to the measurements. If you read the text, it's actually referring to the quarterly observation surveys that are done by Sconset Beach Preservation. When those surveys are done, it's a quiescent condition because there's a person on the beach literally measuring the elevation of the beach. So the worry that someone's going to go out and measure during a storm and find it less than that acceptable distance is really not appropriate because it is those surveys which the condition is referencing. And those are done in quiescent conditions. So if that survey is measuring less than the distance, you obviously have a problem just because the conditions it's measured in. The other topic I want to talk about is the 15 feet. If you take average wave conditions at Sconset and compute wave run up, which is the distance that a wave will swash up, on average, it is 36.7 feet. So if we have a high tide condition, we're over twice the distance you guys just approved at 15 feet. And that's just average. That's not taking into storms, anything like that. So I'm concerned to meet the needs that the town might have for access and when they might need it. By dropping to 15 feet, you are jeopardizing that because that area is still going to be impacted by waves on an average day. Thank you. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ruthven. Do we have any other members of the public wishing to speak on Zoom or physically present in the room on these three changes? Yes, Commissioner Williams, go ahead.
When someone speaks that's not part of the board, can they please identify themselves for the tape?
Yes.
And who they're representing?
Yes, the last speaker just introduced himself representing Sustainable Coastal Solutions. They did that.
Yeah, but who's on whose behalf is he speaking?
Oh,
He also identified himself as representing the Nantucket Land and Water Council.
yeah.
All right, that's what I wanted to know.
Thank you.
He said that.
Okay. So can we discuss a little bit more then about in this new 70F condition? It seems like everyone's okay with the 15 feet, and it seems like there's a desire to have a little bit more specificity to what the additional monitoring might mean if that one quarterly survey did show that linear distance to be less than that. I know, Jeff, that some commissioners here have indicated they'd like to see monitoring happen for a specific set number of days or some time period. So it's not just like one additional survey. I don't know if necessarily it is like logistically feasible to require, the applicant to go and monitor the beach every day for 30, 60, 90 days just because one survey showed that linear distance to be less than the required amount. But is there a way that we can kind of add more specificity to what that additional monitoring would mean?
I think the short answer to that, if I may, Mr. Chair, is yeah. I mean, you could suggest, can require additional weekly surveys, bi-weekly surveys, monthly surveys. I mean, keeping in mind that a quarter is, really 90 days. So it's their next quarterly survey would be due, within 90 days of the first one. But I think the concern we were trying to address that had been raised was if you're waiting 180 days to take action, if it becomes obstructed, that you've really gone through 6 months with a condition that may not be what the commission's looking for. I mean, I guess I would recommend somewhere, for that additional monitoring to be, even monthly would at least give a clue for what it looks like. in the interim without, I think daily is probably excessive too, but, I think you guys could certainly pick a time frame that seems to make sense.
Okay. I have like one thought, but it's just my personal thought because we're trying to capture the timing around when the initial potential failure was first found. It might make sense to require weekly surveys for a month after that initial time and only require additional or only find that the project is in failure if every 4 of those surveys was below that distance. So let's say theoretically there was these aren't the actual dates, but theoretically there was a quarterly survey that was released on January 1st. It's found the linear distance to be 12 feet. Then we would ask SPPF to come back to us to submit additional monitoring for 4 weeks after that. And then if each one of those 4 surveys continued to have less than 15 feet, then we deem that as a problem. But if like if the first survey said 12 feet still, the second survey said 12 feet, the third survey went back up to 20 feet, then we would say, okay, go wait again until the next quarterly survey to try to see if we're still at those conditions. So that's my personal thought, but commissioners, what do you think? Yes, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with the premise of what you're saying. The weekly seems slightly concerning in the fact that you could see a stretch of weather where just within 7 days you can't even do the survey. So biweekly or monthly would be my remedy to that.
Okay, other commissioners? I mean, whatever we do, we have to make sure that it's a timeline of less than 90 days because otherwise we're just gonna be at the next quarterly survey anyway. So yeah, Linda, go ahead.
I agree with Mike on the monthly one. A minimum, I mean, a maximum. I mean, you don't want to do it every 2 weeks because we may have a stretch of weather like this past 2 weeks have been just lovely. So I agree with Mike. You got to do it. And I agree with you. It has to be done a few times. If we find it in violation, we have to do it a few times at least during the 90 days. It can't just be once a 90-day period. So I think Mike's solution is once a month if you find it in violation. Might work. I think once a month anyway, frankly.
Yeah, but if we do once a month, then we're getting too close to the next quarterly survey anyway. I mean, if we're doing if we do 3 months, then we're already at the next quarterly survey. If we do 2 months, then I'm not sure scientifically that 2 surveys, excuse me, is enough of a data point to really see a trend. So how about if we adopt a 45-day period and require 3 surveys within a 45-day period?
Works once a month even. I'm fine.
It's every 15 days.
Yeah.
It's approximately every 15 days, but it would allow for variation if there was a big storm that Mike was talking about. Let's say there's a nor'easter where you can't do a survey for 10 days. Then if one survey was at day 1 and the second survey was at day 21 and the third survey was at day 40, we would still accept that. Yes, Mike, go ahead. Do you have a question or comment?
No, you just cleared that up. Thank you.
Okay. And we're operating under an assessment that all 3 of these surveys would have to show that same failure criteria distance of less than that 15 feet. If any one of them was above that, then that would be considered not in failure. And it would go back to additional monitoring as the quarterly surveys progressed. Commissioners, any comments, questions on that? Does representatives from SPPF have any thoughts on that? Or Tim, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to say I like your plan. I agree with it.
Thank you. Chip?
Yeah, so we have two circumstances here. And I don't have a problem with the way that it's written right now, because every situation is going to be a little different. So if there is an unobstructed access violation at any time, then we have to come back to the commission, and the commission will determine this was an anomaly. You need to have survey. We want to follow up. And that's the first version. And leaving it the way it is will give the commission the discretion to act as according to the situation. The second piece is the failure. And all I'm asking is that the two consecutive quarterly surveys for Q2 and Q3, that would mean failure. Now, that doesn't mean that you couldn't find us in failure under the first circumstance if something happened that wasn't an anomaly. But I think that you're leaving the discretion to determine today how often and how many surveys you need. It may tie you down, and it may make requirements that become too complicated and too onerous for everyone. I think you leave the discretion with the commission to act once we report that there has been an obstruction, and that the failure would only be if it occurred 2 consecutive quarters for Q2 and Q3.
Thank you, Mr. Nyland. And on a personal level, I do agree with you, but it seems like commissioners want us at this point to determine some timelines. I am personally fine with just saying that the commission has the authority to document how the initial monitoring needs to be done in the case of said violation. I'm fine with that. I'm fine as with the condition as how it reads today, but other commissioners indicated they weren't. So that's why we're at this place. And I think we could even just get around it by having it be a little bit more open, saying that said monitoring should be on at least as frequent a basis of this, but if we decide it needs to be more, we could always do that at that time. Linda, go ahead.
So you're okay with the looser language that's proposed at the moment? Because then we can decide whether or not the monitoring was okay or whether it needed to be done because we had a storm.
Yeah, I mean,
That
it's very similar to how
Okay.
we handle any enforcement situation. The primary tactic of the Conservation Commission in any enforcement situation, not just on this permit, is to have the applicant come to the commission to present what has happened and how to monitor it or mitigate it or remedy it. That's what we do in all purposes. So
How
I'm
do we determine if it's got a problem? Who determines that?
the Conservation Commission at that point would determine it.
No, but in order to get it back to us to decide what happened, who does the monitoring down there during a quarter to see if there's a problem?
SPPF's consultant, um, currently Woods Hole Group, but it seems like it might be a different outfit in the future. They do the monitoring. They tell us the data. I mean, all the data that we take from this project is collected from SPPF. It's not the town or private citizens or whatever. We're using their own data to make the assumptions of what's happening there. So if they find that condition, then they'll be required to tell the commission and then it will be the commission's duty to decide what we need to do. I think that's totally reasonable, but I know,
Okay.
Linda, you wanted more specificity, so that's why we proceeded in that fashion.
Well, let's flesh that out a little bit then. Because I'm okay with what you're saying. But who they may decide, I'm not saying they're going to do that. If there's a violation, it may not be reported. So,
I mean,
mean,
any permit holder is free to do whatever they want, but I doubt that they would risk further liability by purposely ignoring the order of conditions. That sounds that sounds like a not wise scenario for anybody involved. I mean, anybody is willing to look at the order of conditions document and completely ignore it if they want, but it will lead
right,
to significant enforcement and legal considerations if they do that.
okay, so they're going to come up with their own monitoring system then without us telling them how often to monitor it. But through you, Mr. Chairman, to Chip, are you comfortable with the way this is drafted right now?
Yeah, yes, I was. Remember,
Okay.
I sat on a commission for 9 years myself, and I happen to agree with the chairman that every
Okay.
enforcement matter is different. Every situation is different. We have an obligation under the first part of this language that we
Right.
have to report if there is a violation to the commission, and then the commission discusses what we do. My concern was with the back end, the last sentence, which talks about 2 consecutive quarterly surveys, and that could be any quarter. And that's my point. For failure, it should be for quarters 2 and 3. I didn't have a problem with the first part of that provision.
All
Thank
right,
you.
that's where I think I got confused, Seth, because I'm back to the middle quarters, which is where the public's going to be on there. It's going to fail on and off during the first quarter and the fourth quarter. So I sort of in agreement with Chip on this one, but I understand you said our obligation is to all 4 quarters. But
Yeah, I
how
would
do
just
we
say
resolve
too,
that?
I would just say too, the language in 28-24 talks about all 4 quarters. It talks about any 2 consecutive surveys. I know there's been a lot of concerns about different conditions in the past. Up until today, this hasn't been one that I've heard before. I hear Mr. Nyland's point about recreation, but I just want to remind you of what Jeff and what I've said before in the past. Recreation is part of the bylaw, and it's in the regulations for us requiring unobstructed access along shore, but it's just part of it. We need to require access for all those other reasons that Jeff mentioned. And just saying that we need to require access in quarters 2 and 3, that seems like something that we're going to get challenged legally over. That seems extremely arbitrary to me. Thank
And
you.
now, then we'll back that up for a second. If there is a problem with both those other 2 quarters, which are the first and the fourth, then we have, under the way it's written, we have the ability to take into accident situations and crazy stuff that went on down there. So we can decide there is no violation or if there were extreme circumstances kind of thing. So it's not necessarily it's going to fail in December and March for crazy reasons.
Of course, and I'll just remind the commission
Okay.
too that it has plenty of discretion, even in enforcement orders, even if it finds that there were um, 2 consecutive surveys that showed that distance to be less than 15 feet, and so showed that project was in violation and met the failure criteria. I mean, it says here that that could lead to actions including revocation or removal of the project, but it doesn't require us to do that. It can require us to do whatever we want. It could just say, we know the beach is there, is too, there's not enough distance. We need you to put additional mitigation sand to make up the distance. You know, we have a huge amount of discretion to deal with failures, even if they do. Hopefully, no failures occur, but even if the failures do occur, that doesn't mean that the project is all of a sudden dead. It still can be remedied in many, many different ways.
Or take into account and that we had endless storms for 2 weeks, type of thing.
Yeah, the
All right.
commission
All right.
at the time can deal with that as they wish. Ms.
All right. After we
Moldenhauer,
flesh this out, I'm fine leaving it the way it is. Like, I agree with you then.
Meredith, yeah, you're welcome to speak at this point.
Good morning, Meredith Moldenhauer from SDPF. Just reiterating what Mr. Nyland identified in regards to kind of our request for Q2 and Q3 to be added to that last sentence. We're fine with everything, and we do think that there is required monitoring for the entire year, and obviously it does also allow for us to come back and engage the commission if that quarterly monitoring is then less than that 15-foot requirement, but that the failure criteria would be tied to Q2 and Q3. This was also articulated previously by Dr. Dunk in many other prior discussions. So this is something that we believe is backed up by the science and the data to kind of focus on the time period in which there is the most concern, obviously, for failure. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. And I hear the point loud and clear from SVPS representatives. I think if we were to do that, it would be shockingly in violation of the regulations that we protect. I mean, you can't read unobstructed access along shore as something that we are required to uphold, and then put in a condition that requires that only in specific seasons, that is just regulatory insufficient. It might theoretically or even scientifically or even on the basis of the community make sense, but on a regulatory level, that just seems like a recipe for disaster to me.
Beth, if I may,
Yes, go ahead.
I agree that that we should have it as year round. Forgive me for having to put it in these terms, but I need to also consider protecting the town from any possible legal challenges if the beachfront isn't available throughout the year.
Thank you, Vince. Linda, go ahead.
I think the conversation we just had between you and I should allay their fears on trying to do something that we're going to get nailed on if it goes to court. Because that's why I wanted to have the discussion about we have the discretion to do what we want if there's a violation of those Q1 and Q4. So I'm comfortable with the way it's worded then, and I agree with you that it should stay the way it is so we don't get into some sort of trouble there.
Thank you, Linda. Emily Molden, did you have a comment that you wish to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Emily Molden for the Nantucket Land and Water Council. I actually was just going to support what you were suggesting, and you and Vince just sort of said it. I think that to define what an unobstructed beach means, but then say that it's only applicable half the year just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I definitely support the direction you're moving in. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So it seems like we're comfortable with this condition as the staff has proposed it. Unless any other commissioners have questions or comments on that one. Okay. So at this point, I want to shift gears a little bit and reference another aspect of the project, or actually really of a different project. So I know at the last hearing, there was a discussion about the sand mitigation volumes that were required under 2824 and the changes to those mitigation volumes since that order remains open and valid. And I know there's been a discussion from SPPF's representatives that they now wish to amend the permit under 2824 to deal with that. And I would just like to say that any applicant has the ability to request amendments to orders of conditions at any time should permits remain valid. But we should not be speaking about that in this hearing because this hearing isn't for 2824. So up until the time that we receive an official AOC request and then have that actually listed on an agenda and heard under that agenda, we should just leave it at that at this point. Obviously, in order to have that request, it would have to be filed on time before the permit expires. It would have to receive the official sign-offs and permission from the town and clear all the potential issues that they may have with an MOU or whatever else. But if the applicant wishes to proceed on that, we'll hear it at the time that they submit it. Any questions or comments on that? Yes, Chip, go ahead.
Thank you. By the way, I agree with your position, but the circumstances have changed since our last meeting. I'm not sure if you're aware. Well, when we had the last meeting and the Permit Extension Act came up, I was under the impression that there had been an extension of the Order of Conditions 2824 that would have made it subject to the Permit Extension Act and would have taken 2824 further into 2025. Jeff and I have spoken, we've texted because I asked where we came up with the numbers, and it turns out that 2824 actually expired in January of 2025. So 2824 is no longer in front of us. We're back to where we were when we filed this notice of intent, that it has expired. It can't be extended at this stage. and it doesn't have any standing at this time. Now and Jeff can follow up. He and I texted this morning because I believe that, and as you know, I wasn't involved earlier on in this process, but I believe that there was an amendment to an order early on, and there was a suggestion that perhaps because of the amendment that extended time. But as we all know, when you amend an order of conditions, you don't amend the time, you go back to the original time. So as a result, even with a Baker permit, the Baker pandemic permit extension time, plus there's 2 years, we expired back in January. The 2 years didn't help. So as a result, in terms of the sand, I don't believe that it affects where we are with the sand replacement or sand nourishment. We agree with you that 28-24 is a separate matter from 37-36. That is, we have devised an order of conditions that's in front of us that we believe that if these conditions are attached, that the project will meet the performance standards both under the state and under the local bylaw, not to have an adverse impact on wetland resource areas. The issue of 28-24 and what we should be providing for the deficit is separate and distinct. And I agree with you that it doesn't play a role in 37-36. And I don't believe that, references to having to contribute sand pursuant to 28-24 now that it expired are appropriate. So in the sections, 51 and 55, we're going to go back to what we've said from the beginning, which is that we would provide 26,000 cubic yards of sand to meet the 22 cubic yards per linear foot for the time that the order of conditions was in effect up until the time of the removal order. And that would be over a 5-year period. And we would come in with a plan to identify where we would be putting that. That would be ultimately be up to the commission if you wanted more up at Reach 1, or if we just wanted to put it over the entire template. We've also in 37-36, what's in front of you is we have a different sand nourishment program or mitigation program. And that's what's called the adaptive sand management, where we start out at 22 cubic yards per linear foot. And then each year we put back what we lost, so that we're not putting 22 every year. We're just putting back what we lost. And if we had adopted that process from the beginning, from back in 2015, as Dwight Dunk has provided to the commission, we wouldn't be in a deficit today. That is one of the reasons that we had problems with 28-24 was because it required too much sand that didn't reflect what the conditions were. Some years you could lose 15, some years you could lose 4 or 5, and so it didn't make sense to put in 22 cubic yards per linear foot on a yearly basis. And we asked that it be tied to science and to actual removal, as opposed to this 22 straight formula that didn't bear a relationship to what's actually taking place. We all know that 22 per cubic yards was established for a pilot project, and it was going to be for a period of time so we could gather some information and see what was going to be necessary. So at this stage, we're comfortable with what we have offered, and that what we would change is the language in 51 and 55 to reflect that we'll provide you that plan with the 26,000 cubic yards per linear foot to make that up, and we would do that over a 5-year period, and instead of asking us to come into compliance with 28-24, which is no longer, it's already expired, so it doesn't have any standing, and it's not necessary for us to proceed in order with 37-36. We actually think, you know, if you just, now that it's expired, if you force us to comply with that number, it's punitive. It's not tied to science. It's punitive. So that's what we would like to offer and make sure that when the commission is deliberating and determining what that number is, that it should be tied to the actual number that is being lost out there. Remember, what we're supposed to do is replace the sediment or sand that would be lost if the geotubes weren't on the beach and at the base of the bluff. And that's what we've provided to you. The commission has approved it for going forward in 37, 36, and we have no reason why you couldn't apply the same formula to what's taken place to date.
Thank you, Mr. Nowen. First on that, Jeff, can you corroborate what Mr. Nowen was saying, that SE 482824 is expired, and can you give us the official date of expiry?
Sure. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing. So I'll walk everyone through it as best I can. Give me 1 second just to bring up my little note sheet here, so I don't say it incorrectly. So we did look at it. It's some unfortunate timing on when stuff was filed that made it a little extra confusing. So just to walk through it in its entirety. Sorry about that. SC 482824 was originally issued on September 30th of 2015. So following that normal order, the first 3 years would have taken us to September 30th, 2018, and then to September 30th, 2021, where you add on then a COVID extension because it would be valid for that whole period. It got an additional 462 days. And then beyond there, it got an additional 2 years from the new Mass Needs Act. And when you total all of that up, that moves to January 5th of 2025 for when that would have expired. So it gets a little tricky because at the same time, the order was amended in 2018 and it was issued on November 28th, 2018. So it was kind of midway through, was just in the start of that extension. And if you carry that date forward following that same COVID tolling and then the Leads Act, that moves to March 5th of 2025. So you're talking about 60 days difference. In that same time, there was a lot of talk about a 60-day extension for some sand placement and things through that stretch. And also DEP releasing their policy 85-4, which makes it very clear that they don't recognize amended orders of conditions as extending order dates. So that reverts it back to the original. So that was a really long, twisty way for it to say there was some belief that it was going to expire on March 5th, but in truth, because of that policy, it expired on January 5th. Sorry for the dizzying explanation.
Okay.
So it is expired. Just barely.
Okay. And in terms of what else Mr. Nowen said, you know, I disagree with the fact that I agree that the orders need to be treated separately, but I do disagree with the fact that they don't relate to each other, because we specifically have a finding that says that this order will replace the order under SC 482824. You know, unless we remove that, which I don't think would be a prudent thing to do, we are required under this order and under the whole process that is ongoing, without getting too far out of bounds here. I mean, the MOU that the select board signed with the SPPF requires the applicant to make up the deficit 24 in order to proceed with this project. So I think that, you know, having them say we can do it up until the removal date is not valid. You know, if we have indicated that the actual expiration date is January 5th, then we can base our calculations on January 5th and require the amount of sand that was due up until January 5th for the mitigation. I think obviously moving forward with the new project, as Chip said, there is a new adaptive sand management proposed. And it hasn't not been accepted by the commission, but it wasn't met with any unfavorable opinions at this point. It won't be accepted until we actually issue this permit. But I think we do need to make up the sand deficit at the 22 cubic yards per linear foot that existed in the prior order. It's not punitive at all. It is strictly on the basis of you know, the ability for this order to replace that order and to not invoke the removal order. That's not punitive. That's a way to be collaborative. So Commissioner Williams, go ahead.
I go along with what Chip said. I don't know how to put that into language, into a decision, but I don't want to set this up to fail again. And I don't want to set something up that's artificial, that doesn't necessarily based in fact or science or some other thing. And I don't want to be punitive. And frankly, I think that is punitive to some extent. So I don't, the way Chip phrased it, I'm comfortable with the way Chip phrased it. I don't know what to do after that.
Thank you. I think the discussion that we all had at the prior hearing was very different to what you just said, but I'll take your point at this hearing. Other commissioners wishing to speak? Yes, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I know I put the condition together, and I just want to weigh in with a little bit of history too, and why it's relevant to this. And I apologize for a little editorializing from staff perspective, but our permit application here is requesting to continue the operation and maintenance of a structure that's currently ordered removed. So the conditions that cause that removal need to be satisfied to some degree in order to re-permit that structure as it currently exists on the ground, right? That whether it be this project or any other project, if that was the case, you have to re-permit that, and you have to deal with the reasoning why that removal was put in place. And I think the part that, we wrestled with internally a little bit about what volume to put there is the conditions were put in place to protect the resource area, whether you believe it should have been 2 cubic yards or 22 cubic yards or 1,002 cubic yards is kind of irrelevant, because it's what was permitted. It was not appealed, and in all fairness, had 10 years to be amended and changed, right? It went through an amendment process in 2018. For those who weren't on the commission, as the person who kind of like the last man standing from start to finish here, when we discussed the removal order, we don't mention often that there were 2 hearings before then where remediation plans were requested, and the commission was told no, that they weren't going to be offered, right? So it wasn't by trying to, be punitive or get there, but at some point, to bring a structure back into compliance, you're offsetting the impacts of the structure. It's not just replacing the sand that's going to be lost, as you're dealing with the impacts as well. That there was ample opportunity to deal with it. And honestly, if you don't satisfy conditions of permits, why are we putting conditions on permits, right? Like, that's really what the core of it is. I mean, I know it seems aggressive and mean, but why are we going to publish an order of conditions with 71 conditions at this point if you don't have to honor the conditions that you don't like or that you like, right? Like, that's why we ended up putting a minimum amount in there, because that's what satisfies that previous condition to release that removal order. I mean, I hate to be, cold and emotionless about it, but honestly, that's our job as staff, is to do that.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'll just remind you, that the whole reason that this process was allowed to proceed was in the hopes that some alternative to removal could be permitted. You know, the town and SPPF desired for that structure not to be removed, which it legally we had the Conservation Commission had the legal valid right and still retain the legal valid right to do that. The whole purpose of this whole process was to find a new solution that would first bring that project back into compliance, and then second, discuss a plan to move forward that would serve everyone's interests. And if we don't satisfy the first part of that requirement, which is dealing with the conditions that required the removal to go forward in the first place, then there's no reason that we should go forward with the second part of this, which is permitting a future project. You know, the alternative here is we could just ask the structure to be removed, and then we could also still issue this permit, and then they could put a structure back in, but we wouldn't do that because that's nonsensical. You know, the reason that we're doing this is to eliminate the need to remove the 2824 structure, and to satisfy the issues that arose with that permit and that permitting history, and to replace that permit with something that can be adhered to in the future. Linda, go ahead.
Maybe I'm being simplistic about this, but I've done permitting for 43 years now, and I'm looking at this as a brand new application, which should theoretically be untainted by what happened before. And that's what I'm struggling with here. If 22 isn't needed on any given year, why are we making them put 22 on? That's why it sort of started to fail before, because maybe you don't need 22, maybe it's 15, maybe it's some other number. Why are we saying 22, screw you, doesn't matter, you got to put 22? That's, that's sort of where I'm stuck.
Thank you, Linda. But I'll remind you, this isn't a completely new application, and even the applicant's notice of intent will corroborate my fact. They specifically applied for this permit to replace the old permit. And that's in the notice of intent, and that's in the record many times. So I hear what you're saying about not wanting to move forward with the 22 cubic yards per linear foot and to adopt adaptive sand management in the future. We can, and it seems like we are willing to do that. But we do need to make sure that in order to proceed with this project, we satisfy the conditions under the other order that needs to be dealt with for this order to proceed. If you wanted a blank new permitting project history, then in 2021, we would have required this, or 2023 or whatever year it ended up being final, we would have required this project under 2824 to be removed. There would be nothing on the beach, and then they could apply for a new permit later. That would be the only way to have a blank permitting history, because the failed structure that's subject to an ongoing enforcement and removal order continues to exist. This permit must satisfy dealing with that before we proceed. So thank you. Other commissioners, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This, I feel like, is the most difficult part of the whole order. That's no big surprise. I mean, on one hand, I agree with the applicants, and that just putting sand on the template to push it into the ocean is certainly not based in science. We still have 2824 to deal with to get that into compliance, so sympathetic to that as well. Maybe part of the solution, and I'm not sure it's anything we're going to decide upon today is the time frame that the mitigation sand gets put back out in. You know, if it's not needed within the five-year period, maybe 7 years is a better number. I just don't see throwing sand in for the sake of throwing sand in on a number. It wants to be based in science, and I'm comfortable with the plan going forward as well.
Thank you,
Thank
Mike.
you.
We can adopt any timeline that we think is relevant to meet the interests of the act and the bylaw. And it doesn't, also the sand doesn't have to be directly on the template. It could be in front of the structure, to the sides of the structure, or in any other location along the stretch of beach that the commission thinks will satisfy the conditions that required the removal. We have a great amount of flexibility there. I don't think personally we have any flexibility on the number though. We have to adhere to the number that was in the permit for as long as that permit was active. That's just basic regulatory compliance. I know science and regulation sometimes interact in a good way and sometimes they annoy each other. But we are primarily, first and foremost, a regulatory board. If we don't do our regulatory responsibilities, why are we even here? Thank you. Chip, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we have a fundamental issue here, which is the relationship between the two orders of conditions. And you let off your discussion this afternoon or this morning before you were aware that it had expired by stating that the two are separate and distinct, and that if we wanted to amend 2824, that's separate and distinct. And that's our view. We've spent time to put together an order of conditions that allows us to meet the performance standards under 3736. And 2824 is a separate question, having to resolve whether or not we put in what number it is that we put in with respect to the renourishment or replacement is separate from 3736. You have an order of conditions that's going to meet the performance standards. It's not reliant upon having to bring 2824 into compliance because the section of 2824 is part of 3736. So it's going to be in compliance and going forward. Where we also differ is that we have some responsibility on the 106,000, whatever that may be. I mean, we specifically agree that up until the time of the removal, we will put in the amount that we would have had to put in if it was 22 cubic yards per linear foot up to the time of the removal. But everyone knows that we stopped at that stage because it was too much sand. And we were told, and I wasn't involved, so it's hearsay, we were told that the commission was not going to change that. That's why we didn't go back and attempt to amend it, is that we were told by commission members, no, we're not going to change that. You're tied to that regardless of what the science is. So we had no choice but to stop. We didn't have any other choice at the time. So now to tie us into an order of conditions that I think everybody agrees was not tied to science, but was tied to the 22 cubic yards. And that, yes, we didn't appeal it. We didn't appeal it because it was going to be a pilot project. It was only going to be around for a couple of years. And once we realized that it was an overabundance of sand, ultimately we stopped providing that sand. But we are agreeing that we will meet our obligation up until that point of the removal. And then subsequently, we're looking at what is the performance standard? If we're looking to protect the resource areas, if that's what we're all obliged to do as applicants and as regulators, then we look at what is the amount of sand that will protect it. And using the adaptive sand theory, the same one that we're using going forward, if we applied that to 2824, it'd be a surplus. We've provided more sand than that would have been expended if the geotubes weren't there. That's what makes this punitive, is that over an abundance of that requirement. I don't believe there's anything in your regulation or in this order that requires you to enforce an expired order of conditions. You did that. You enforced it with a removal order. And when we looked at it, we all agree that a removal order is not in anybody's benefit. What we want to do is to solve a problem for this beach so we can protect the coastal banks, so we can protect properties, we can protect roadways, we can protect lighthouses instead of having to remove the geotubes. And we've come up with a plan and an order of conditions that will do that. But to the extent that you then state that we have to provide 106,000 cubic yards of material that's not related to science, then that probably kills the project, and not for any reason related to meeting the performance standards, but for some view that you have no choice. And I say that the commission has that discretion to make that determination and do what's right for the resource areas and what's right for these properties.
Thank you, Chip. To respond to your first point, I solely meant that the permits were separate, and the fact that 2824 is not listed on our agenda today. We shouldn't be speaking about things that aren't posted on the agenda. I don't mean to say that they're not connected at all. That is my clarification on that point. I would also say that we have plenty of testimony in the record for this hearing and other hearings that have preceded this permit process for the same stretch of beach that show that 22 cubic yards per linear foot was determined for a reason, and that starving the beach of mitigation material may have led to impacts. That's that's well corroborated in the record. So I think that ultimately, this isn't a question of trying to revive expired orders. This is a question of trying to satisfy the conditions of a project that was in failure, satisfy the conditions that led to that failure, so that we can proceed with a project that ultimately or hopefully does not become in failure, and hopefully serves the interests of the beach bank and dunes in that area. That's the whole point of this process. I've said it many times before. I think I'm getting repetitive at this point, so we'll move on. But Commissioner Williams, go ahead.
I'll say it again. The way he expressed it, I agree with Mike. Throwing sand at it to throw sand at it is not productive, nor makes any sense. I understand the previous order. I understand. I've been on here long enough to understand what's happened with the previous one, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm moving forward. I agree with everything Chip just said. I can't do something else. I'm sorry. I may be the only one that agrees with Chip, but I think Chip makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. We have hands raised among the public. The first I saw is Dennis Murphy. We'll recognize Mr. Murphy, and then I see Dr. Donk after that.
And Emily too.
Yeah, Emily's in the room and had her hand up after Dwight.
Okay, we need to bring Dennis Murphy over from the attendee list on Zoom. Mr. Murphy, please introduce yourself with the record, your connection to the project, and then make your comment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dennis Murphy on behalf of the Greenhill family. And I have 3 quick points that I don't think we've discussed this morning. The first one is we've talked about the expiration of the prior OOC, but I wanted to remind the commission that it has issued an enforcement order that is not expired. And the terms of that enforcement order require compliance with the OOC, including the 22 cubic yard sand mitigation until the geotubes are removed. So that's one independent reason for the mitigation sand. And I have 2 others. The original OOC in 2015, the 2824, was the product of a settlement agreement, and the commission is a party to that. So yes, it's a permit, but it's also a contract. And in the contract is the requirement of 22 cubic yards per linear feet. The third is there is a third permit issued by DEP the superseding order of conditions. And that also requires the 22 cubic yards per linear foot. You're to take your legal advice from your own town council, but I also believe that you are free to condition and not get confused by the different permits. You're being asked in your capacity as a discretionary board to approve an order of conditions, and you are entitled to impose what conditions you would like, including you could decide that you require the deficit to be made up at a certain rate that was required under the prior OOC and the settlement agreement and the SOC. And you could also decide that going forward, you might change that number for future mitigation. I'm not advocating that position. What I'm really clear about is that you don't have the authority to retroactively amend the permit to lower the number. I don't believe the commission has that authority. And so that was the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Dr. Dunn?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, may I suggest an amendment or a change to Special Condition 55 in an effort to bifurcate these issues so that you would have a clean, essentially a clean new order of conditions for the new project going forward that then would allow for the makeup sand to be addressed by the commission, and such that the 55 be shortened to read: the applicant shall provide a plan to the commission, a plan for commission approval to supply all nourishment sand not provided under SE 2824, period. That way, there is a clean condition that requires a makeup plan to be submitted and approved by the commission under this order. And then we've said in the notice of intent that we've requested that the existing geotube system be maintained under this new order. But I think that gets it to a point that a plan gets submitted for review and approval and discussion by the commission without dragging all the issues that we've just talked about into this new order, which I think that's what makes these two orders very clumsy. That's my suggestion in an effort to make it cleaner.
Thank you, Dr. Dunk. That version of that condition was actually in a previous draft of this order, and it was specifically requested to be amended to include the actual amount of mitigation sand, the actual number of cubic yards required, so that we didn't have to deal with this twice. I know it is confusing and complicated and probably emotional for people to deal with this, but on a rational basis, I hear what you're saying. But if we do that, then we're going to still come back, and the commission will still have to have the same discussions, where we'll probably still lead to the same confusion and drama, and ultimately still probably arrive at the same number anyway. So I would prefer that we just do it now, so we get everything done, and so that when this order is hopefully approved, that members of the public have sufficient clarity on what it actually says and what it actually means, versus trying to figure out things later. But that's my personal opinion. Thank you. Ms. Molden, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Emily Molden for the Nantucket Land and Water Council. Just briefly, I would say that I very much agree with your comments there. We still believe strongly that the intention of this permit was clearly to replace the removal order and the enforcement order, and that it is very important for the commission to specifically identify what will be required as far as making up for that sand deficit. I also just wanted to suggest another way for commissioners to think about the position that this project is in now that I've been thinking about a little bit, which is if you imagine another property on the island that has a significant vegetated wetland on site, and an applicant comes before you for a proposal to fill in a portion of that wetland and construct a structure, and to mitigate that impact by replicating the wetland somewhere else on site. The permit later on is not, the building is constructed, but the wetland replication that was required as mitigation has not been completed. That same applicant then comes back before the commission with a request to say, we no longer want to replicate the wetland as required for our prior impacts, but we would like to fill in the rest of the wetland with another structure. And I think it's just really important for the commission to keep in mind that this is not just throwing sand over the bank for the sake of throwing sand over the bank. The sand that we're talking about here is mitigating for prior impacts that have already been permitted and agreed to. And so just as you would not necessarily permit another structure without seeing the wetland replication or mitigation in another area, similarly, the commission should not allow further impacts to a wetland resource area without first seeing completion of the impacts, the mitigation required from a prior permit. And again, just to reiterate that 22 cubic yards was very much based on science, and as has been stated, a lot of that is in the record already. Thank you. I have actually a couple of other comments, but they're not related to this point, so I'll hold them till later.
Thank you, Emily. Linda, go ahead.
I'm having trouble with what Emily just said. I understand we're going to require a certain amount of sand in this order, on this application. Going forward, we're going to require that amount of sand. But if we're going to ask for 22 on top of that, that is throwing sand over the thing just to throw sand over the thing. There's no way we can go back and fix what they did not do over the last 10 years or so. We can't fix it by simply throwing more sand that was supposed to be thrown over the bank during that time that wasn't thrown over the bank. Now we're going to throw that sand on top of the sand that we're requiring in this order. I must be missing the point. It's not emotional, it's just practical, and it's got to make sense to me, and it doesn't at the moment. I understand wanting to fix what they didn't do, but throwing more sand on top of the sand that we're going to require in this order makes no sense to me, just to make up the sand that they didn't do. I understand that maybe we go out 7 years instead of 5 years. Maybe that spreads it out a little bit more, but I'm still having trouble with the concept.
Thank you, Linda. And you're right in one sense, we can't go back in the past and, deal with any impacts that might have happened for the lack of mitigation sand. But we certainly, by requiring the appropriate amount of mitigation sand to be put down now, can buffer against those impacts and can ensure that those impacts don't continue to have adverse or don't continue to spread adverse conditions on this stretch of shoreline.
But why do we say it's 22 as opposed to 15, as opposed to 10, as opposed to whatever, based on the science? Why are we setting 22? Because I know it came out of the previous order, but if that doesn't make any sense now, why am I doing that?
Please let me finish. So the mitigation sand requirement that we're asking for to make up the deficit in 2024 is not somehow on top of the new mitigation sand. It's actually preceding that. Before even the project gets constructed, they need to apply or supply that sand to deal with the issues that were caused in the deficit of the other permit. And then moving forward, transitioning to a new number, I think is a completely separate question. The question that we're having here is solely how can we, if not mitigate for, at least remediate the impacts that happen by the lack of compliance for the sand delivery under the past permit? And supplying that sand now absolutely has the potential to remediate any impacts. So thank you. Tim, go ahead.
I admit to being massively confused by all this, but so what you're saying is in order to close the permit or whatever appropriately, we need to require this 100,000 cubic feet of yards of sand and put it all down somewhere along the bluff over some period of time. I guess my question is that good science? I mean, is that does that make sense scientifically? And will it, is that really gonna replace, several years worth of not delivered sand? I admit it, obviously I'm confused, but it seems like going forward, they're saying we have this adaptive sand management plan, but we're also going to require another 100,000 cubic yards. And I just wonder if that's good science. And I guess that's my question.
Thank you, Tim. Other commissioners? I saw Mr. Ruthven's hand raised from the public. We'll go to them first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trey Ruthven, Sustainable Coastal Solutions on behalf of Nantucket Land and Water Council. So they're partially correct in that by not mitigating over the period since the original geotube system was in place, there have been impacts along the entire coastline of Nantucket. The point of actually putting out the 100,000 cubic yards is to actually provide a buffer against further impacts for that coastline. It's like beach nourishment. We see it all over the United States. The reason for beach nourishment is to protect that beach from the impacts that have already happened, but into the future. By not putting that sand out, we are taking the impacts and then amplifying them as opposed to trying to mitigate them, which is the whole point. And I can remind everyone, because we've talked about it in the past, the 22 cubic yards was actually determined using science generated by SPBF. So again, it does have a real bearing in the world and in science. So just keep in mind that, yeah, the sand, the 100,000 is not, relative to the mitigation going forward. It's the mitigation that should have been in place the entire time that it was not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ruthven. And on the point about how the 22 cubic yards per linear foot was determined, I know this has been brought up many times, and I know you and Dr. Dunk have diametrically different opinions on this. Instead of restating what's been said before, I'll just tell people to go into the record that exists for that hearing and look at the submissions and look at the permitting history, and you can see that number came up as part of a process that SPPF was involved in. Chip Nyland, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
We're at a crossroads here, and we've resolved all the matters with respect to 3736, and I would hope that we could close the hearing on 3736. And as Dwight indicated, I would like to resolve that number as 26,000 cubic yards for taking care of 2824 today as part of the order. And that's what I would ask. But if not, I would ask that you remove the reference to the 106,000 cubic yards. Our view is that if you don't come up with a number and ask us to come back, that's a separate matter, that we can have this discussion about how it's going to be applied, how much is going to be applied, when it's going to be applied. Mr. Brain is actually correct. I mean, if we don't just throw 100,000, some is sacrificial, some on top of the template. I mean, there's lots of different ways to pursue this, but we shouldn't stop and hold up 3736, where we've come to an agreement as to what the standard is going to be for the adaptive sand management for 37, 36. We don't need to spend, another 2 or 3 months keeping 37, 36 open to address that. It's separate and distinct, just like the removal order. So what we're looking to do is remove the reference to the 106,000, accept the 26,000, or to have us come back with a plan in 21 days so we can resolve this. But, to keep the remainder of this order open as we're dealing with this deficit, I don't think makes sense to us or to the members of the commission, because again, as I've said many times, it's a separate question from going forward with 37, 36. We're ready to go forward with 37, 36. I think we've resolved all of the questions. Was it a new order? Did it meet the performance standards? You brought in a peer review. I mean, we've done everything that the commission has asked us for failure requirements, for removal requirements, to making sure that the owners have to state that they will remove their house in the event that it needs to be removed. I mean, you've placed in this order of conditions a number of protections and conditions so we meet the performance standards. We're ready to go forward with that and separate out 28, 24.
Thank you, Chip. Just as a general matter, no one applicant can unilaterally request to close the application if there are additional co-applicants. In this project, there is an additional co-applicant, the town of Nantucket, represented by Vince Murphy. So we would need to hear from him to see if he consents to moving forward in the way that you are outlining.
And I think, as you may have noted, just very quickly, as you may have noted, the only issue that we had with the town had to do with the quars. And we have, as you saw in my letter on February 7th, we've removed the requirement to have the quar repair replacement as part of this notice of intent. So I know that was of some trouble to the town. The town would not consent to that. So what we've said is that we've removed that request. So I believe that our co-applicant has had all of its matters resolved as well. I'll let Vince speak for himself, but I'm not aware that the town has any other standing issues now that the quar has been resolved.
Thank you. Well, we do need to let that applicant speak for themselves and get assent to that in the record.
Thank you very much, Seth. So there's a couple of issues here. I understand the big push to close. We all want this to be over. I'm very much looking forward to the day where we can do that. I'm happy with the core issue that is resolved. The issue that I'm still trying to understand is how the sand deficit and coming back into compliance so we can move on. That's part of the MOU. So it's something that the town looked at. And when we were re-engaging in this process in way back in the before times in I think it was October of 2023, we looked at compliance as part of how the select board was going to move forward to partner on this. So one of the things, I'm just kind of curious to know how that's going to play out. I appreciate the want to separate them, but the town would have to be satisfied that there is a path forward to resolution on SE 2824 and the missing sand issue. One of the things that I would like to do, if that's okay with you, Seth, is I realize that I think George Pucci may be on this, and he is town council to this as well. I've asked him to be here today. I'd just like to understand if he sees any exposure to the town in this before we can even consider the closure issue.
Thank you, Vince. And I will recognize Mr. Pucci at this moment. So feel free to go ahead.
Hi, good morning. George Pucci here. I'm half on the road and half in my office, so I'm carrying my phone around with me off camera. I would not be able to opine on that right now. Vince, if you need to think about that request further, I'm happy to consult with you about it. If you're ready to assent to it, at this time, that's fine too.
I think time to consider is probably the best thing I can do at this point.
Yeah.
Thank you, George. And Seth, if it's okay with you, I would request with the trying to work with town council to make sure that we are fully satisfied, and request that we continue briefly to one more meeting at least.
Thank you. We have some other things to do before we get to that point. I know also some of the town's concerns, related to the MOU or other processes are outside of this commission's direct process. But yeah, I mean, we do need both applicants' formal verbal or written consent to close the hearing before we move forward. Ms. Moldenhauer, go ahead.
Good afternoon or good morning. Just like to kind of reiterate, I've heard the conversation back and forth, obviously, regarding condition 55 and trying to find the proper sand nourishment requirement. SBPF has continued to say that, we will and we are solely responsible. The town is not responsible on this point, that we are solely responsible for identifying that. And it's the commission, not the town, that obviously has to vote and make a decision on what the appropriate amount of mitigation sand is for the old project and the pilot project. I would just like to identify and state that the SBPF members did get together on Friday the 7th and had a Zoom meeting. We had over 50 members present. We discussed the fact that we understand that there needs to be a mitigation number, and we want that number to be based on science and not punitive, and that we also want to ensure, to what Commissioner Williams said, that this does not create failure again. We've identified that the 106 number would be paralyzing and would paralyze the project. And so we would hope that obviously, we were ready to close. If the commission wanted to vote on this issue and decide a number, we are focused on the science, and that obviously 22 is not a science-based number. If obviously the commission has adapted a sand mitigation requirement for the current project, if you want to apply that as Mr. Nyland identified after the removal order date, that would be something that we would be willing to work with. But we would hope that maybe the commission could identify a number, close up this issue, and allow this these many months that we obviously respect the commissioners for all the work that they've done on this, but to resolve this and allow this issue to be closed.
Thank you, Meredith. And even if said project was to be closed today, which it seems like it won't be, we wouldn't be issuing the order of conditions at this hearing. We would still take the time to review all of the technical information, and after it's closed, we could decide that to put in whatever number we want. I mean, we're doing a somewhat odd process here, in that under most permits, orders of conditions are strictly discussed after the hearing is already closed. So the fact that we were discussing it while the hearing is still open, I think gives the applicant more of a ability to weigh in. But we could have just closed this months ago and decided it all in one day when the hearing was closed. But Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, for one, would love to close the hearing. It's been over a year. I realize that's not likely to happen today. The mitigation sand continues to be the sticky wicket, as was stated here earlier. I just wanted to throw in, if we lowered the sand deficit, it's surely going to be met by appeal by persons that, possibly the Green Hill family. I'm not saying they would do that, or the Coastal Conservancy, again, not saying they would do that, but we're still even if we close the hearing, agreed on it, I think we're still a long way away. I do think that there's merit in the time frame addressed to the mitigation sand, because at some point we may be able to take sand off the ocean floor and put it back in. Admittedly, I know nothing about what that would entail, but I do think that's going to be a long-term solution for Nantucket, and not only this project. So I hope to close this very soon and take care of the mitigation sand issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And I'll just remind everybody, the commissioners, the public, applicants, we need to make our decisions based on what is in the regulations and ensuring that we are making permits or writing orders conditions that protect the performance standards of protected interests, and not really worry about additional processes. You know, not worry about financial concerns, not worry about litigation concerns. We're not here to consider that. You know, the probability of appeal or litigation on this permit from any number of parties is high, just given the history of what's happened throughout this project in the past. We just need to make our decision based on what is right for the regulations and the performance standards. That's all we can do. We can't really consider anything else. I know we did have some additional comments and questions from members of the public. We'll grant like a few minutes to go through that. And then after that, we will be discussing when to continue this hearing to. So Emily Molden, I know you had indicated you had additional comments that weren't related to what we were talking about before. Please feel free to make those at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Emily Molden for the Land and Water Council. There was just one additional thing that I wanted to bring up for the commission's consideration and possibly discussion more during your deliberation. And that was just in reading the draft order again prior to this morning's hearing. And there's another concern that I just wanted to highlight that I think could maybe be addressed in the conditions when you're deliberating. And that has to do with some of the issues that we've seen over the years with ongoing maintenance and mitigation during successive storm events in the wintertime, usually. So when we have successive storms during a given winter or storm season and weather conditions do not allow crews to get down onto the beach to maintain the template, and the sand is removed from the front of the geotubes, then what we've seen many times in the past 10 years is periods of time that could last weeks, even longer, where the geotubes remain uncovered. And what that really does is it prevents us from understanding how much sand would have been eroded to the system if it had been accessible. So when the template is constructed in a way where there's remaining sand on top of the geotubes, and for an extended period of time, that's not able to be moved down in front of the system, then we are unable to calculate how much sand would have been lost. So one of the primary reasons we've always been adamantly opposed to the adaptive mitigation is just that, because it means that we're almost always working with a deficit that we don't fully understand, just because it's not always possible to keep sand in front of those geotubes. So we can't actually calculate what would have been contributed. So, I mean, in this way, adaptive mitigation itself isn't always based on science. Practically speaking, it's just going to be incomplete for most or many years. So the conditions that I wanted to point to as a result of this are condition 64, I know currently requires the geotubes to be recovered if they're exposed within 14 days. And then obviously gives them an opportunity to request a extension from this by the commission if it's warranted. But there's no maximum time frame given anywhere for which the geotubes can remain uncovered without constituting a failure. And just thinking about the failure criteria long term, if there is an extended period of time when those geotubes are uncovered and sand is not available to the system, it seems that it would be really appropriate and helpful if the maintenance of that template is better addressed through the failure criteria. It clearly states that the commission is meant to grant an extension if it's going to be longer than 14 days, but if for whatever reason they're still not covered, that should maybe be another trigger for the commission to consider. The final question that I would just ask, which might be more legal and procedural based on the discussions that have come up about the expiration of 28-24. I guess I'm sort of wondering, there seems to be a case being made by the applicant that when that permit expired, the mitigation and nourishment requirements may have expired with it. So I guess it's a question either for the commission or the staff. When this permit is being drafted, presumably it will also have either the 3-year lifespan, or maybe there will be extensions for that. When that permit expires, if there are geotubes remaining on the beach, do the conditions for mitigation expire with the permit? Or as long as the structures remain in place, even if a certificate of compliance has not yet been requested, is the applicant still required to provide that mitigation going forward for as long as the structures are in place? That, I think, is an important question to answer as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. We'll direct that specific question to staff and council to talk about and give us a answer at a different point. I mean, it's obviously clear that if a order has a certificate of compliance with ongoing conditions, that those extend into perpetuity. In cases like this, where there is no certificate, I think we do need clarification. So we'll go to Dr. Kriebel at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, commissioners. My name is Dave Kriebel, and many of you are aware I work on behalf of the Greenhill family. I'm a coastal engineer by background and a professor emeritus from the U.S. Naval Academy and work for coastal analytics. I wanted to make you aware that we submitted a slide deck that covers a new survey that we conducted. The Greenhills have been very concerned about the accelerated erosion on their property, and they commissioned a survey to be done. It was a drone-based photogrammetry survey conducted to very high standards by a Massachusetts-based firm, and to survey standards, so we can resolve ground elevations very precisely. But we also convinced the Greenhills to extend the survey south because, as you're aware, I've written previously about the impact of the geotubes on adjacent beaches, and the fact that whatever happens there, the sand must move down the coast, and there are other people that depend on that flow of sand. So the Greenhills surveyed. Eventually, we covered the area down to Codfish Park. I'm not going to cover all the slides, and I will let you look at those. There's a lot of pictures, but I want to make the point that the design drawings that you have before you on this project are based on beach conditions from June of 2022. And the survey we conducted was 29 months after that. As we sit here today, we're 32 months after that. So at the moment, when you look at design drawings, you're basically looking at conditions that are about 3 years out of date. And the point I'd like to make, and we've made this before, but we urge the commission very strongly to require a new survey before the order of conditions is approved. But let me tell you a bit about what we found in this other survey. The erosion is continuing downdrift. And as I mentioned, the Greenhills and others are quite alarmed by that. The erosion is obviously continuing in front of the geotubes. This is the passive erosion effect that I've talked about before. So the beach is narrowing and cutting down in front of the existing geotubes. All of tiers 2 and tier 3 are now exposed. A portion of tier 4 was exposed by waves washing sand away, and in places the top of tier 1 can be seen. Ironically, at the time of the survey, the beach was impassable to pedestrians, apparently, because there are footprints in the sand that can be seen in the images. The person walked on the dry beach in front of the coastal bank, but then got to the and the waves at the time were washing up and hitting the geotubes, so they climbed up on top of the geotubes, walked along, and climbed down. But we wanted to make you aware that the survey shows that conditions have degraded substantially since the conditions that you have before you. And what that means is that the construction of this new project will lead to a much more dramatic coverage of the existing dry beach in areas that the new geotubes will be installed. But I think more important, it leads to and casts doubt on whether the project can be constructed without a Chapter 91 permit. We have looked at a couple locations. There's one in my letter that shows that if you look at the excavation trench and where it would intercept the existing beach, you have very, very small margins between there and the mean high water line. Certainly, the margins are so small that you could not fit a stockpile of sand there, nor could you run big, heavy construction equipment there without crossing mean high water. And, this would occur on the town-owned land, so I think the town certainly needs to be interested in this issue and whether a Chapter 91 permit would be required. I have a number of different conditions that we recommend. Some of them you've already talked about today. I won't go through them, but I just want to leave you with this, that we urge you, we think it's in the commission's best interest to get an up-to-date survey, up-to-date design drawings that show also the construction plans, the excavation trench, and the stockpile. We think that the commission owes it to itself and owes it to the public. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kriebel. Other members from the public? Deanne Atherton, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We had communicated with the natural resources staff. Oh, I'm Deanne Atherton, and I am the administrative assistant coordinator for the Coastal Conservancy. We had communicated with natural resources staff, and Jeff said he was going to bring this up today. I just wanted to remind him, but we would hope that there would be a condition in this order, if a positive order is issued, that there be an independent reviewer who reports directly to the commission. There was such a condition in 28-24, and it proved to be invaluable. So we would hope it would be included in this order. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanne. We certainly can consider that condition. In absence of that condition, the commission already has that ability by statute anyways, but I don't think there would be much pushback to including that type of condition.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Any other members of the public? Now is your chance to speak. Okay, seeing none, Mr. Nyland.
Thank you. Just very quickly to Emily's point, and Jeff, I believe, will support this with respect to the failure issue. Number 53 requires a removal plan for all aspects of the project. So that could be if it's by order or if at some point they just have to come down. That's part of a removal plan. It's already in the order. With respect to sand mitigation that Emily raised, 70A says failure to provide sand mitigation as required herein is a failure criteria. So regardless of what takes place, the commission has that authority. If we don't follow it, that would be a violation. With respect to the survey, we've said we have no idea what's going to happen here with respect to appeals or anything else in terms of timing. We have committed to having a survey before we start, and that has to be provided to the commission. That was shared with a peer reviewer who agreed that would be the right time, as opposed to do it now when who knows when this project will ultimately proceed. And finally, with respect to Chapter 91, I think we all know we want to stay out of below the high water mark because we don't want to have to apply for a Chapter 91 permit. Jamie Feely's testified a couple of times about where we are and that we will be able to avoid that. And then and finally, I'd like to say that SBPF, we appreciate the fact that the commission has kept this hearing open during deliberation so we could talk these things through. I think that that's been very helpful to the applicant. I think it's been helpful to the commission and to the public. It doesn't happen very often. I agree with you, but in this instance, given the complexities of the issues, we appreciate that very much, that you have kept that open so we could have an open deliberation. We'd hoped that we were going to close today. The town doesn't want to, so we'll have to pick another date, and hopefully that's very soon. So I wanted to thank you and the members of the commission.
Thank you, Chip, and thank you everybody involved. I know this has been a long, confusing, and sometimes frustrating process. But such is the nature of complex permitting. So just quickly on the survey. I mean, I understand where Dr. Kriebel and other members of the public have come to requesting that we have an updated survey. But I do somewhat agree in that it's best to have the survey most accurately define the conditions on the ground prior to construction. Mr. Nyland indicated we don't know when this project will proceed. There's a chance it will never be constructed if it doesn't clear the additional requirements that happen outside of this regulatory board. There's other needs that exist with town meeting votes and licenses and select board processes and all that. So, yeah, I think requiring an up-to-date survey just to look at and then requiring another survey later, which may be years later, honestly, isn't that beneficial? I do 100% agree with Dr. Kriebel that the conditions have absolutely changed on site from when the original plan was submitted. But if we want to capture that change as to the biggest extent as possible, let's get the real survey when the project is going to be constructed. And then a point on the Chapter 91, it's the applicant's responsibility to not run afoul of any other permitting requirements. If they get to the point where they're trying to construct this project and they realize it's impossible to do without entering the mean high water line, they're going to be required to amend this permit. They can't just, or I mean, I guess they could decide not to construct it, but the process exists for amendment for these reasons. And I would just leave that there. So, commissioners, any other thoughts or questions or comments at this point? Yes, Joe, go ahead.
It appears to me this comes down to obviously one item, 106,000 cubic yards or 25,000 cubic yards. That's a wide gap. I thought maybe some compromise might work, but based on the way the discussion's going, it doesn't look like there's much room for compromise. And it's sad to say because we had spent more than a year on this project.
Thank you, Joe.
In the meantime, we cut down a lot of trees to burn out a lot of paperwork.
Well, electronic for me, but I understand what you mean. And I think as a rational person outside of being a member of a regulatory board, I get the idea of compromise, but we can't just pick arbitrary numbers in the spirit of compromise. We have to pick something that is regulatorily sufficient. So that's where we're stuck. I think we all wish we could just pick a good compromise number, but if we do that, that's seems arbitrary to me. Okay, so at this point, we have to continue this hearing to a date certain. Our next regular meeting of the Nantucket Conservation Commission is next Thursday, February the 20th. However, if we were going to actually hear substantive testimony on that hearing about this project, any letters or what have you would be needed to be submitted by tomorrow at noon, which is a sufficiently short amount of time. So we can certainly continue to that date for the process of hoping to schedule another special hearing, or we can continue to the Concom's next regular hearing in March. Mr. Nyland, how would you like to proceed?
I would like to continue to the next meeting for two reasons. Number one, I think the limited question is whether or not the town is going to assent to a closing, and I think that that's something that they can resolve in the next couple of days, and I don't think that requires anything to be submitted. And the second issue has to do with separating out 28, 24 from 36, 37, which I think can also be determined without much testimony. I think that's a discussion among the commission members. So I think we can take care of that at the next meeting.
If I could, Seth.
Yes, go ahead, Vince.
Continuing to the next meeting means that if I have to get a letter in, I might not have sufficient time tomorrow, basically by noon tomorrow, 24 hours, to consult with legal counsel to generate any letter if one were needed.
Yeah, you essentially have less than 24 hours, and in our procedural update that went into place in January 1st of 2025, we've made it very clear at this point that we will not directly consider the testimony or the details of letters that are filed prior to that timeline. So if you want to submit anything written, it's not going to be for the 220 meeting for sure.
Yeah, I don't think we need to submit anything, right? I think it's a fairly simple question for the town whether or not they're ready to ready to close. And I don't think they need a letter for that. He can say at the next meeting, yes, we want to close, or no, we don't, and then we would continue to the next meeting after that.
Sounds good. If
But
that's
we can always move. I don't want to lose the date. Yeah, we can always, if we're going to pick another date, then let's pick this one because it's right in front of us, and then we can decide what happens at that meeting.
Yeah, that's
With
fine.
respect- With respect,
If we get to that meeting and we're stuck with we can't talk about anything except for scheduling, we'll be
Right.
stuck. We can only talk
Perfect.
about scheduling.
Yeah.
Vince, is there something you wanted to say?
Yes, please. Thank you, Seth. I do have to, I am not acting alone. I do represent the town. I do have to take back some of the issues and concerns back to not only legal counsel, but to various other people and see if there's any issues that the select board may have, if town administration may have. This is not, the town is famously not the most speedy beast in the world. This can take time. I do need a little time to make sure that there are no issues, that there are no pitfalls for the town in this, and that legally we have something to stand on. I'm very pleased with the way this order is shaped up, but I do need to do my due diligence.
Okay. Well, the
And
next
I absolutely appreciate that, and Vince has been a great co-applicant. And I couldn't, and I'm hoping it gets resolved by then. And if it isn't, then we'll continue it. And no harm, no foul is the way that I look at it.
Thank you, Chip. Just for reference, the next meeting in March, the next regular meeting at least, is March the 6th. For everyone to mark their calendar. We do need consensus among applicants to the actual date we're continuing to, though. We can't just have one applicant continue.
I would happily suggest going to March 6th for discussion. If you went to the next regular meeting, it would just be for scheduling only.
Okay. Commissioners, how do you feel about this? Linda?
I got lost there. What are we doing now?
We're
Are we
continuing.
not continuing it until next week to decide where to go from there?
We're continuing this hearing to a date certain. The options before us are either continuing to next week, the 20th, which it seems like will only be for scheduling because Vince has made it his belief that the town is not ready at that point to discuss substantive details. So we'll
Right.
only be for scheduling, or we can continue directly to March 6th for a substantive discussion.
Is that our next regular meeting after the 20th?
Yes. So
Okay.
I'll let anybody make a comment on how they like to proceed.
I would agree with Vince that we'll go to the 20th for scheduling only. But I imagine if he says he's okay, that scheduling could be a closure as well as a schedule.
Okay.
And if he needs more time, then on the 7th we'll extend to the 6th. on the 20th, excuse me, we would then extend to the 6th.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes, just as Mr. Nyland laid out, the 20th for schedule purposes, and if I think it's pretty likely we'll go to the 6th.
Okay, so I think we have a consensus here. We're gonna continue this hearing to February 20th for the purpose of scheduling only. With that being said, that is the only item on our agenda today. So we do need a motion to adjourn.
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Linda and Joe, for the second. By roll call vote, Tim Brain,
Aye.
Mike Miserelli,
Aye.
Joe Landowski,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Seth Engelberg, aye. Thank you all, and we will see you on the 20th.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Yep, you as well.
Bye.